Hey everyone, and welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to be uh, really diving into some fascinating stuff about the world of fantasy. We've got some great analysis from some experts in the field. I'm really excited to unpack this with you.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun one. Talking about these amazing worlds, magic systems, how authors bring these characters to life. It's really a fascinating look at the genre.
Definitely. And the cool thing is, you don't have to be like a fantasy expert to enjoy this.
Hmm.
Whether you're writing, reading, or just curious about what makes this stuff tick, I think we've got something here for everyone. So let's get into it. We're talking about like the core of fantasy, right?
Hmm.
Building these worlds, making the magic believable, and those classic myths that always seem to pop up. What really gets me is how these authors create these secondary worlds. It's not just a backdrop, it's like a whole other reality.
And one of our sources even says that creating these immersive secondary worlds, as they call them, are vital for drawing readers in. I mean, think about it. It's like stepping through a doorway into a parallel universe.
Right, where the impossible is possible. But you have to have that suspension of disbelief, right? Like the source was saying.
Totally, yeah. We have to be willing to just like set aside our skepticism and buy into it. That's where the magic happens.
It's so true. And the detail involved, it's not just like, oh, there's magic. They build out these intricate systems, the creatures, the cultures. It's wild.
It really is about believability, like you said. I mean, take Game of Thrones, for example. George R. R. Martin doesn't just throw dragons at us, right? You've got the politics, the religions, the family dramas. It feels so real.
Exactly. And that's what sucks us in. Like, we're right there with them. Imagine
Yeah.
being Bran Stark, this young guy. He can suddenly tap into the minds of animals. He's a skin changer.
Oh, yeah.
And then, boom, he's seeing visions past, present, future. Crazy, right?
And that blend of the familiar with the totally fantastical makes it so compelling. We see how these abilities shape him, force him to grow.
Mhm.
It makes you wonder, how would I handle that kind of power?
For sure. Okay, so we've got these amazing worlds, but it's more than just a cool setting, right? How about the magic systems themselves? I mean, how much explanation is too much when it comes to magic?
That's the question, isn't it? One source even argues that magic isn't about explaining every little detail. It's about that sense of mystery, of wonder.
Yeah. Have you ever read a book where it's like they're giving you a physics lecture on how the magic works?
Right.
You lose that awe?
Or the flip side, where it's so random it just doesn't make sense. What do you think works best?
It's got to be a balance for sure. You want that awe and wonder, but also enough explanation to ground it?
It's like you want to know the rules, but you don't want it to feel like too scientific.
Right. Like
Yeah.
you said, got to have that mystery.
Totally. Okay, so we've got these amazing worlds, the magic, but what about the characters? Fantasy always seems to challenge our ideas of heroes and villains.
Absolutely. One of the sources actually connects this to those classic myths and legends. Like
Mm.
those old stories are the foundation for how characters grow in fantasy. And they specifically talk about the Stark kids from Game of Thrones, right?
Yeah, they're a perfect example. I mean, think about it. They lose their dad, face danger at every turn, and they're always forced to make these tough choices. Their morals are constantly tested.
It's like a way more complex version of the classic hero's journey.
Exactly. And speaking of complex, the source also points out how fantasy messes with our ideas of good and evil.
Oh, totally. You rarely get those clear-cut good guys and bad guys.
Right. It's all shades of gray. Makes you really think about your own moral compass.
For sure. I mean, look at a series like The Wheel of Time. You've got this massive world, a crazy magic system, but Robert Jordan really digs into the nature of good and evil. You're constantly guessing who to root for.
It's true. And that moral ambiguity, as the source calls it, makes us confront some uncomfortable truths about ourselves. We even see it with the Lannisters from Game of Thrones.
Oh man, the Lannisters. Talk about complicated.
Right. Cersei, Jaime, even Tyrion with his good intentions never knew what they'd do next.
Always kept you guessing. But it makes those characters and those stories stick with you.
Something I find really interesting is how the source talks about fantasy, even with all the magic and stuff, reflecting our own world. What do you think about that?
I think it's so important, actually, because even though these stories have dragons and magic, they're still grappling with real issues, power, social injustice, war, prejudice, things everyone experiences.
Right. It's like fantasy gives us this new way to look at those issues.
Exactly. We can process these big, sometimes scary ideas through the lens of a story. Look at The Handmaid's Tale. It's a
Oh,
dystopia, but it uses those fantastical elements to explore things like social control and women's rights.
It's like holding up a weird mirror to our world.
That's a great way to put it.
Oh.
And that's why I think it's so powerful. It's not always just escapism. It makes us think about ourselves and the world around us.
Have you come across any stories that deal with real-world issues in a way that really resonated with you?
Oh, tons. Like The City We Became by N.K. Jemisin. It's urban fantasy, but she really gets into gentrification and what it means to belong in a city.
Right.
And those Studio Ghibli movies, Princess Mononoke, Nausicaa,
Mm.
they make you rethink how we treat the planet.
Such powerful stuff. And it's incredible how fantasy can tackle these big issues but still be so entertaining.
Yeah. You can get lost in the story, but then you're left thinking about it long after you're done.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of it. It transports us, makes us think, and reminds us of the power of imagination.
It's like we need that reminder sometimes,
Yeah.
that there's more than just the everyday.
Absolutely. There are always new worlds to discover in books, in movies, and in our own minds.
So true. Well, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive. But hey, next time you pick up a fantasy novel or put on that movie, remember, you're not just escaping reality. You're exploring it. Thanks for joining us, everyone.